It is a great pleasure to welcome America's leading expert on adolescence, who offers his prescription for instilling a sense of purpose and fulfillment in today's youth. And as you'll discover, further work that he's done since the launch of this book on family businesses and his latest book that he's going to tell us all about, author of The Path to Purpose, helping our children find their calling in life. William Bill Damon, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Aidan.
It's so great to have you, man. I know you don't do much of this type of stuff, podcast work, so I'm very, very grateful and I feel privileged to have you on the show. I thought we'd give an overarching feel for your work first before I go into I was telling you, I have copious amount of notes here, way too much to fill the hour. But I thought we'd give the origin of your work on purpose, where it's brought you since, including the work that you've done on your own purpose now, which led to the latest book that you wrote about your evolution of purpose, or how purpose adduced from you from your own relationship with your father, etc. Maybe we'll give that as a kind of a context builder, and then we'll get stuck into this book that you launched a couple of decades ago.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things. Purpose has been the master concept that I've explored and studied, and that's directed my work for the last 20 years. And that grew out of a couple of engagements that I had. One was a collaborative set of studies that I did with my dear friends, Howard Gardner and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is a dearly departed friend. He passed a couple of years ago. Howard, fortunately, is still around. And we got interested in the late 1990s and early 2000s in studying what we called good work, which basically is work that is both successful and ethical. And of course, there's lots of work that is successful, at least in a material sense, that is not ethical. And there's some ethical work that isn't successful and so on. But our presumption is that if anybody in business or the professions or any other leading field could actually choose the kind of career they want to have, of course they'd want to be successful, and they'd also want to do the right thing. They'd want to feel proud of what they're doing, feeling that it's contributing to the public good. And so those are the people we took a look at, the people that really had that kind of track record. And the book we put out was called Good Work. I won't go into all of that, but I will say that my own angle on it, what I learned from it, each of the three of us had our own particular set of insights. My own insight was that all of the people we interviewed and got to know, and these are people who were lawyers and doctors and journalists and educators and people in business across the whole spectrum of leading fields. The people who we found were good workers were people who really had a deep, deep sense of what their field accomplishes, what the public mission of their field was. And they could be quite eloquent about describing it. The journalist would talk about how work in journalism was important to give people the information they need to make good choices about their lives and about their citizenship. And they give lots of examples of that. And they had role models, like pictures of people like Ed Murrow on their wall and so on. And the lawyers talked a lot about justice, and the people who were in education talked about learning. They all had their idea about exactly what their field could do for the public mission. And after we finished that project and the book got around quite a bit was used in professional education programs and so on, I began thinking, well, as a psychologist, what is the psychological representation in the human mind of a public mission? In other words, as people in everyday life don't always go around thinking, well, what's the public mission of my life exactly? That's more of a work thing. But in everyday life, what is the psychological equivalent of doing good work in all of the arenas that we operate, which include family, include art and sports and citizenship and faith and work. And that's where it came down on the word purpose, the concept of purpose, it occurred to me, this is what the individual version of a public mission of a field is. And so I got very interested in everyday people, not just leaders in businesses and professions and so on, but just folks living their lives, having children, going out to the neighborhood and getting to know their neighbors and friends, going to church or going to an art exhibit or taking their child out to a sports event or something like that. And I started a series of studies of how people develop purpose, who has purpose. And that, of course, coincided very much with my interest in adolescence, because in fact, the adolescent years is when most people begin to discover something that begins to look like purpose in life. So that's the professional history of my interest in purpose. And at this point, I looked at the development of purpose all through the lifespan, because it doesn't end with adolescence. People continue finding new purposes in life all the way up to late life, even after they've stopped working or their children have moved out of the house. You still need purpose in life. And so that's how I developed my interest and my research program on this topic.
This episode is not for, I don't want people to tune out and go, oh, it's for parents or it's for teachers. It's for everybody. It's for mentors. It's for people. It's for you, for your own purpose, for those people listen to us, to understand yourself. As Aristotle said, first know thyself, to understand perhaps what instilled purpose in you. Some mentor along the way in your life may have said something to you. All this information is in this book. But Bill, before we even go near the book, let's mention where this work on purpose brought you, because your most recent research was into family businesses and how purpose can be instilled and passed almost like a relay race baton from generation to generation.
Right.
I thought we'd share maybe a thought on that, but also then your own personal experience, because your latest book touches on your own purpose and how that emerged for you over time.
That's right. After I had become familiar with the patterns of finding purpose in life, I began connecting it with a lot of difficult challenges in my own life and also in the world. And you mentioned two of the most recent engagements that I've had. One was a study of businesses that tried to incorporate family members. And some of these are multi-generational businesses that go back sometimes centuries, in some cases, sometimes just years, but where a grandparent and a parent and a children are all brought into a family enterprise. And it could be anything from a restaurant to a huge corporation that's the largest enterprise in a particular country. And we were interested in this because a lot of these families struggle. They struggle because often they are not on the same page with the younger generations. And there's a surprising amount of conflict, even among businesses that are quite successful. And it's a challenge to think about how to keep the businesses going over the generations, and also how the businesses can keep oriented to doing public good. Because all of these families, if they have their choice, they not only want to be successful, they want to feel proud of what they're doing, and they want to feel they are serving the public in some way. either by the product that the business is creating or by employing a lot of people or by services and so on. And so these are the aspirations that families have. And to get right to the point, a lot of the families that we got to know had been talking about values. Well, we all want to have good values. And I would go in and say, values is a weak concept. We can all say, well, I value this or I value that. But how do you really know that you're going to walk the walk, not just talk the talk? And in order for that to happen, this is where the concept of purpose, I think, is helpful because purpose is an action based concept. It's not only a belief, it's not only saying, well, I have a sense that I care about something. It's good to have that sense that you care about something, no doubt about it. But what are you doing about it? What are you actually doing that might involve even some sacrifice? It certainly involves some commitment. Commitment means that you stick with it. You stick with it even if things get tough. If you have a problem that arises in the case of a business that arises because there's some change in the marketplace or something like that, are you tempted to give up your your goals or do you stick with it? Do you actually stick with it and keep plowing ahead? That's what purpose does. Purpose means resilience. It means commitment. It means action. And so we would speak with a lot of the families, and we've written a number of articles about family business. And we emphasize that of course, everybody wants to have good values, but you need more than that. You need to develop purpose among the family and share purpose and make sure the younger generation is purposeful. And so that was the application of my work on purpose to family business. And I had some wonderful collaborators on that project. It was a multinational project that included Europe, the UK, Asia, Africa, and we got to know families all over the world. And I thought it was one of the interesting applications because it was a place that nobody had really gone before. And introducing the idea of purpose to these family enterprises, I thought was a kind of an innovation that at first surprised people, and then they got it. They understood why it's important. Now, you mentioned my own life story, and so just as I found challenges out in the world of folks that were having difficulties with things, I took a look at my own life. And as you said, Aristotle said, "Know thyself," and that's pretty fundamental. And I had to admit that there were large sections of my own life that I had avoided getting to know. I have a personal story. Well, I'll say it very quickly, but this is what I wrote the book about. A personal story of a father who disappeared from my family before I was born. He was of the generation of Americans that served in Europe in World War II. And he was, at first, he was in the army. He was in Germany and then was transferred to England for a while and then never came back. And my mother never heard from him. We didn't know what happened to him. And during my whole childhood and most of my early adulthood, I assumed, like everybody else, that he was killed in action and missing. My mother would always say he was missing in World War II. And I accepted that and never thought about it very much. But then when I was a young adult, I discovered differently. Somebody said, no. So a relative said, no, your father is still alive. He just abandoned your family. He never came back. At that point, I tuned out. I didn't want to hear anything about this. I felt he must be a no account, irresponsible guy. I don't want to identify with him. I don't want to get to know him or learn where he is. And just to get to the point very quickly, and if folks are interested, they can always read the book. One of my daughters, after I turned 60, this is pretty late in life. One of my daughters, who was maybe 30 or 35, got interested in this grandfather that nobody ever talked about and did a bunch of research and found out a number of things that just at that point in my life made me feel I better get serious about this and really find out what happened and how he influenced my life. And the book is called A Round of Golf with My Father because one of the things she discovered by going through oral histories, he ended up being a fairly distinguished diplomat serving in Thailand. And she discovered that he was a great golfer. Now, I love golf, and yet I am not a great golfer by any means because I never had lessons. And that was the one area that I started getting bitter about. I started getting resentful because I figured I had a good life. I had a good run in life. I did fine in education and career. I had a wonderful family with 3 children and so on. But I never really learned how to play golf very well. But I do love playing the sport. So that was the canary in the coal mine, this feeling of resentment that I had about why couldn't this guy ever have come around at least once to teach me to play golf? So I did a lot of psychological explorations of my own life. And I used a process called the life review, which I write about in the book. And basically the idea is you look back at your life and you unpack all of the resentments and things that didn't go right. You try to figure out, what did I learn from them? And this is where purpose comes in. You think about the things that did give you satisfaction in life and the accomplishments that you had throughout your life that you can bring forward with the new understanding and recognition that you've achieved by going through your life in a life review manner, including the parts of your life that you actually regret or that you have resentful feelings about. In this case, it had to do with my father, which I had never admitted to myself. So rather than deny or bury those resentments, which is what I had done in my life, you think about what you can learn from them and how they can contribute to your purpose in life moving forward. So that's what the book is about. It's called A Round of Golf with My Father, the new psychology of dealing with your past to make peace with your present. And it ends with a kind of a dramatic round of golf. My father had been dead for quite a while, but when I started doing my explorations, I found a cousin that I'd never met from my father's side of the family who found in it his old family garage, my father's set of golf clubs. And he sent me the golf clubs. In the golf clubs was a scorecard at a country club in Massachusetts. I went back, I played a round of golf against his scorecard. And that was the kind of epiphany of the book where I felt I had actually resolved a lot of these issues and bonded with my dead father. It helped me forgive him, even though he did some harm to my mother. It helped me understand him better and forgive him to the extent that I could and make peace with that difficult part of my past.
Well done for doing that, because it's a difficult thing. A lot of people wouldn't go to that extent. And I'm sure the writing process was a healing process in itself to help you make sense of it. I think those experiences that can be damaging are often also the creation of you in some way. They push you in certain directions, and sometimes you can never understand how. And I wondered,
Right.
as you recounted the story, did you find in some ways perhaps some of your characteristics, some of your purpose has come from this in some way, or some flickers that may make sense to you now that didn't before?
Absolutely. I discovered actually that even though my father wasn't with me as a child, his existence made a difference. because my mother had learned from him every where he went to school, educational issues. And also I had some sense that eh, I, I always was, I've always been a kind of a patriotic person, so, sense that I do believe that uh, civic purpose is important, and that includes an allegiance to the society that you live in. And I think a lot of that sense came from my father's service in World War II. And as I as I dealt with some of the difficulties I had growing up without a father, I I had to make up for that myself. I had to learn how to, in a sense, operate without that kind of guidance. And that made me stronger, I think. Hemingway famously said, life breaks everyone at some point, but a lot of people who survive that are strongest at the broken pieces. And I felt that that was true, that in learning to do things for myself, I developed a lot of strengths that I would not have developed without a father absence. And also the importance of the past. Uh, a lot of my work on purpose is a very forward-looking concept. The future draws you into it in purpose. You have purposeful dreams and visions, and you then rise to the occasion and move ahead. And so it's very forward-looking. But in the process of doing all that work on purpose, I think I had underestimated how important it is to also come to terms with the past. And that's the other thing that this episode with discovering my father and what his absence meant to me was that it gave me a sense of how important it is not only to think about the future and where you want to go, but also where you've come from and how that has shaped you in ways that give you strengths as well as the kinds of experiences that feed your visions. So just as I've quoted Hemingway, I also quote William Faulkner in the book, who said, I thought this was a wonderful psychological insight. He said, the past is not dead. It is not even past. And I thought that was a very profound sense that it is part of who we are. And I had been denying that through my life. So I learned a lot through this episode. And hopefully that has it certainly improved my peace of mind, but hopefully it's also improved my work and my capacity to go out and work with families on purpose and so on.
Brilliant. And when we're speaking of quotes, there's a quote I pulled from the book that I absolutely loved. It was Thomas Carlyle this time. And he wrote this well over 200 years ago, the Scottish historian and philosopher. A person without purpose is like a ship without a rudder. And
Yeah.
I thought that would be a nice way to open up the path to purpose from a very high level. And then maybe I'll just pull out a few threads. As I said, I have multiple threads. I have a whole rug here in front of me, Bill, of notes. So we could do a 10-hour episode, but I'll pull out a few things, and please just maybe give us an overview, and then I'll try and direct it where it's helpful for audience from a parenting perspective, from a leadership perspective, etc. But maybe open up with that idea of the rudderless society in some ways.
Carlyle is great for quotes. And that one, I think, does get to the heart of what the advantages of purpose are. Purpose absolutely gives people a sense of direction. It is like a compass in some ways that once you've invested yourself in something you believe in, and it doesn't have to, I always want to emphasize this right at the beginning, does not have to be heroic. It can be. There are obviously people in life that have done amazingly heroic challenges of finding cures to cancer or finding ways to help people come to peace in the world and so on. But purpose can also be quite ordinary as raising a child or doing a humble job, not a heroic job, the kind of job that a teacher or the custodian does, or anybody. But once you have that, once you have a sense that what you are doing is a benefit to the world beyond the self, not only to you, not only to your own self interest, but also it matters to the world. And once you have a sense of that, gives you a direction. It directs your efforts from day to day. And that sense of direction, it's like a ballast. It's not only a rudder that gives you the right direction, it also keeps the ship steady because it helps you bounce back from difficult circumstances, from failures. Lots of people with purpose confront failures all the time, either whether it's in business or in a social cause. Somebody with a purpose to help alleviate poverty in their community. Of course, you're not going to 100% succeed. You can spend your life trying to alleviate poverty and should know full well that there's still going to be poverty at the end of your life. Nobody has that kind of power, but you can still do a lot of good. You can help a lot of people who are without means. And it gives you a direction and a steadiness and an ability to bounce back from challenges, from failure. And that's the resilience part. So that is one of the benefits of purpose. And of course, not everybody has purpose, and not everybody has purpose all through their lives. And people who feel purposeless often feel that they're drifting. And drifting is the opposite of moving in a steady direction. So that's where the rudder comes in. That's where the ship's rudder comes.
Seeing as we've almost given an overview of your tome, all your work, all your different books, and this book, The Path to Purpose, was the third book that you wrote about youth development to a public audience. You wrote one for a
Mhm.
decade. So The Moral Child was in 1988, Greater Expectations was in 1995, and then The Path to Purpose came. So maybe you'll share the evolution of your thinking over those decades. And then I thought it'd be really interesting for you to share how it's evolved to today. So how you saw this book, which is so relevant to today's youth, and to many of those youth have grown up in the meantime since you wrote it, because some of the stuff that you even talk about in The Path to Purpose, like some people's realities have been scripted by their parents. Some of the youth who even got into college, it was their parents who pushed them and wanted them to succeed. So it's a reflection on them. And that could lead to disappointment. It can lead to depression in many cases later on for people. There's a lot in there, but maybe you'll bring us on the evolution of your work since The Moral Child in 1988.
Sure. Well, The Moral Child emphasized how young people, right from birth, and I'm talking really young, 6-month-olds, are prepared for a moral life. And I, in that book, wrote about at the time, some very recent experiments. As you said, this goes back to the 1980s, and it's hard to imagine, but even the method of videotaping and analyzing video of interactions between babies and their parents was new at that time, incredibly enough. With our cell phones now, we take videos in a second and so on. But this was when videotapes were still being developed, and at that time, that innovation, even though it seems archaic now, that video innovation enabled people to discover that babies, even babies, have empathic responses. If a baby will get upset, if the baby is around other babies that are crying and upset, or a very young child will be upset if he or she notices his mom crying for some reason, or the opposite. Somebody's happy, the joy is shared. And so that empathy, which we discovered is actually present at birth is part of our Constitution. And so a lot of The Moral Child was written to elaborate that idea about how prepared young people are. And so it gives adults who are interested in encouraging the children to be compassionate, to be honest, to be respectful, all of the virtues that I believe every parent wants their children to have. In fact, there was a survey in the late 90s that 98% of American parents wanted their child to be truthful and honest, which does make you wonder about the other 2%, but 98% is a very large result. And so parents want their children to be virtuous, and they have a lot to work. And that was what The Moral Child was about, was how the natural inclinations of our species open up a lot of opportunities to give children responsibility, to give them guidance, to give them instruction. It's not, you don't have to beat the child down. The child is prepared to do this. And then you mentioned my next book, Greater Expectations. And that was about a social problem that we still have, I think, which is that, and this is what you mentioned, I think, a couple of minutes ago, when parents micromanage the child's life, as I said, children, as I mentioned from my work on The Moral Child, children have their own constitutions and interests that lean them towards pro-social behavior. They're empathic, they're cooperative, they like being with other people, they develop friendships very easily. And when parents feel that they need to write the script of life for the child, often they're doing more harm than good in a lot of ways, because they're not giving the child the encouragement to develop the child's own perspective on life. Children certainly need guidance and they need feedback, and children make a lot of mistakes, and they do need to be corrected and disciplined if they do something that is dishonest or hurtful. But they don't need to be watched every minute of every day and protected against every experience. They need to go out and experience the world on their own. They need to learn from their own experience. And Greater Expectations, the very title, indicated that we need to expect a lot of children, that children have a lot of abilities, both inborn, and they develop a lot of abilities, and they can handle responsibilities, for example. So one of the points I made in Greater Expectations is one of the helpful child rearing methods. It's a very old fashioned method, which has gone in decline in recent decades, of asking children to help out around the house. We used to call that chores. And it can be certainly not child labor. It can be help water the plants, or help shovel the snow, or empty the dishwasher, or perhaps make your own bed. These kind of practices in a lot of contemporary homes are not practiced anymore. And in fact, there's data on that. There was a study I think it was an Australian study, but it applies to certainly the United States, and I'll bet the UK as well, that in one generation, there's been a decline. In the older generation, something like 3/4 of children were expected to do something helpful around the house for their parents. And now less than 1/4 of families expect this of children. And I don't think you're doing children any favor, because it's giving them a sense that they can matter, they can make a difference, they can do something, and that we appreciate their help. And again, I'm not talking about very difficult child labor. I'm talking about gestures of responsibility. So that's an example of what I wrote about in Greater Expectations. And that leads up to the idea of, how do you get young people to be prepared to develop commitments in life, commitments to something that is beneficial to others? So it's not all about me, because I think the big danger of child rearing and of development is that people can become too self-centered. And being self-centered actually is not a route to happiness. When you're very self-centered, it's actually something of a mental health risk. You're anxious all the time. You're worried all the time. Am I, am I happy? Am I protected? Am I safe? And getting past the self to dedicate yourself to something, to others, to some non-sibby, non-self engagement. That's what purpose is about. In fact, in Rick Warren's book on purpose called The Purpose-Driven Life, he has one of the great first lines in books anywhere. The first line is, "It's not about you." And I thought that was a great line. His book is about faith, and I think it's quite a good book. Our work is about more secular kinds of engagements, but it shares that same perspective that it's not about you. It's about what you can do for both yourself and for others. And that's what purpose is about. It's good for the self and it's good for society. It's good for others.
One of the things that is often not understood about all this is that when you have purpose, it is almost like a gravitational pull through moments when you're down, moments where it's hard. I often think about it from a sporting perspective because that's my context. That there's something
Yeah.
that we picked up over the from the ether somewhere, which was like your why needs to be bigger than your try, otherwise your excuses will be. So this
Yeah.
why, whatever your why is, helps you get out of the bed, go out training in those horrible, dirty days where you don't want to do it because you have this deep down reason why you're doing it, and actually it can blind you to any kind of challenges that are in your way because you're just so driven.
I love the sports analogy, and in fact, sports is a great arena for developing purpose among young people who have the good fortune of having some sport that they can be dedicated to. And I love that. Of course, the why question is absolutely central to purpose in every arena, including education. If children or students know why they are studying a subject, they're going to be purposeful. If they don't know why am I taking chemistry anyway? Why am I learning these formulas? That's almost a recipe for being non-purposeful if you don't have a clue about that. And there's one other sports saying, at least in American sports, I don't know if again, this is across the Atlantic, but it also gets to some of the power of purpose. And that is the saying that the best defense is a good offense. And if you think about that, of course, it's not 100% true. You also need a defense. But if you're playing football or something, and you're always keeping the ball down the other side, down the field of the opponent's goal, you're going to have it pretty. You don't have to worry about defense too much because you're on the attack, and and that's the spirit of that saying, is that the best defense is a good offense. But it's exactly the spirit of purpose, that if you're going for something, if you're dedicated to something, especially with young people, if they're dedicated to something beyond the self, they're not going to be hanging around getting into trouble all the time. Believe me, they're going to be out there trying to accomplish what they believe in. So in development as well, I think the best defense is a good offense.
Absolutely. I was so delighted with something I'll share with you. My son, he's very much into MMA and jujitsu. That's what his chosen sport is. He didn't get that from me, but he's so dedicated to it, and I'm very proud of how he's doing it. But I told him one day, I was like, "Only there's going to come a day, some of your friends are going to go drinking down a field somewhere, or smoking, or taking some type of substance, and one of the best things sports give you is an excuse. It gives you an
Yeah.
excuse to go, no, I've training later on. And then one day
Yep.
came back and he told me it happened. He's like, the thing you said happened. And he was actually delighted. And he was one of the last that was offered it. And he said he looked at all the other faces and they were all looking, going, "Oh no, I should have said no." Like, I wish I didn't get asked
Great.
before him. And I thought it was great that, to your very point, I realized how lucky I was because I got into sports, or I was definitely trying throughout my youth. And it always was a reason to go. You didn't go out on a Friday night or whatever it was that you're like, "Oh no, I have a match tomorrow," or you go to bed early. And the benefit of that was huge. And even the halo effect around your other friends, because then you inspire others around you and then they come with you. And maybe they're wandering a bit without purpose. But I wanted
Yeah.
to bring it back to a couple of things because I don't want to bring it to only sport, because you mentioned different domains where purpose can be found for people. Religion, for example, is one, or other purposes. I'd love to share that. Bill, I thought I'd share, I jumped way ahead of my notes here, something that I thought was brilliant. And this was where you visited a small town that was concerned about the way many of its young people had been spending their time. And this was amidst Columbine type scares back at the time. And you visited a fast food joint, and you found this fast food joint was brimming with purpose. I'd love you to share this story because I don't want people to think that this only counts for big organizations or families. This instilling of purpose counts everywhere. And so much so that this small fast food joint serving, questionably good quality food was
Right.
making people into purpose entities and sending them off into the world. I'd love you to share this story.
Good. Well, I'm glad you mentioned it because this is something I always try to get back to, which is that purpose is not uh, only a shining hero conquering the world or something like that. And of course, fast places are everyone looks down their nose at fast food places. And maybe I don't know much about nutrition, and I'm not going to make any statements about whether a fast food hamburger is good for you or not. But I will say that as a place for a young person to work, and that's what we discovered, as you mentioned, when we went out into these just ordinary American communities. In one of them, we interviewed a teenager who had a summer job working flipping burgers in I won't mention the name of the chain, but in one of the very popular, famous chains. And he told us, which sounded very surprising, that this job had changed his whole attitude about work. He went there, he got the job to get some money so he could go out and have a good time. So he could go out and party with his friends on weekends and so on. And that was his only motivation. And he figured it would just be a grubby job that couldn't wait to get back to his partying with the money that he earned. But he said that he had a manager who took him aside one day and the manager said, "Your job is not just to flip burgers. Your job is to put a smile on the customer's face. And think about those people who are coming in here. These are hardworking people. They don't have a lot of means. And this occasion, this meal that they're coming in, they bring their children and they have these happy meals where they get little toys and all of that. This is the high point of their day. This is the high point of their day with their family. And think about that. Think about them and their lives, which are not easy lives, and what this means to them. And think about how you can add a spark to those lives." And this young boy, I imagine he was 16 or something like that, he said, when he began doing that day to day and feeling this joy of sharing goodwill with these customers, these hardworking customers, he said it changed his whole attitude about what it meant to go to work. And he developed purpose through that mentoring, the mentoring of the fast food manager. So this happens anywhere. It happens in in places that are far from elite or nutritionally correct or anything like that.
I copied and sent it to a friend because I had the Kindle version. I copied the entire passage, sent it to a friend of mine who runs a burger joint, and I said, "Yeah, this is where you need to aspire to." But it always also reminded me of this book. It's The Heart of Business by Hubert
Hmm.
Joly, and he was the Best Buy CEO. He reinvented Best Buy, and he did it, as he said in the book, through purpose, finding the purpose on an individual level. So he said everybody's purpose wasn't the same. Like you have the business purpose, but they cascaded purpose down the organization and totally changed the
Yeah.
entire business. And I just thought it
Yeah.
was really important. And then I sent it also, Bill, just to show you where I wanted to show you how your book can affect people and how it can cascade throughout the world. I sent it to a guy called
Yeah.
Rasmus Ankersen, who is a very successful manager of football clubs, and he was involved in the Danish football club years ago. And he talked about how they found it very difficult to spot talent in its young ages. So how did you spot? Why did that kid make it? Like he was always puzzled by this kid who went on to be the star and the captain of Denmark, and they didn't see it. They actually only took him into the club because his dad was a janitor in the club or was the groundskeeper, and they wanted to keep him. So they let his son train with the academy, and then the son goes on to be this amazing player. And I sent him
Wow.
some of the excerpts from your book because I was like on the invisible thing here. And I was one of those kids as well, Bill. I'll tell you, I was a very average, very very average athlete, and I went on to. I've played for the two best clubs in the world, two of the best clubs in the world, and I think oftentimes, like how you were shaped by your experience with your father, that some experiences in my childhood, etc., instill this purpose to prove myself almost. And I thought, what
Yeah.
if that was the missing ingredient, was the purpose, where you can't see that. You can't see what that kid is thinking. You can't see how that kid is training that little bit harder than other people, or if it's in a work environment, doing that little bit extra work. That purpose is the secret ingredient here. And I thought I'd use that as a segue to introduce your landmark study, because you did this study to find out what were the common denominators of these kids that you had studied, to find out what was driving these that was different from the ones that weren't there. Maybe you'll share this as a high level, because that's all the time we have for.
Sure. Absolutely. And I will say just quickly that exactly what you said about sports, about the kids that actually do make it in sports, and you can't always predict that from their what looks like their talent. It's the same with uh, young people in a lot of different other areas, including kids that are considered to be quote child prodigies. A child that seems to be able to do math really quickly or music and so on. Most of the child prodigies don't really go very far, but some do. There are Mozarts that actually do. And I'm convinced that it's because the ones that make it are the ones that actually find a commitment and a deep belief in what they're doing. And so that gets to your question of what are the patterns, and the patterns of young people who find purpose. And as I said earlier, not everybody does find purpose, especially early in life, but gradually over the years, more and more people do, but it's still not a majority of the population. But people that do find purpose, number one, get to know what their interests are. What is it that they actually have some gut sense that they feel comfortable and enjoy doing it? If you if you want to become a computer scientist or something like that, you you need to actually enjoy the work of programming and math and all of that. Or if you want to be a musician, you have to like music. So number one, there is getting to know what it is that you have a sense of enjoyment, a sense of joy about doing. Number two, what is it that the world needs? What is it that you're capable of doing, that you're good enough to do, that you can make a contribution? And sometimes it's very obvious. If you're, again, if you're tone deaf, for example, and some people are, in fact, I am too. I cannot I can't sing on key. I can tell you that right now. So I'm even though I happen to love music, by the way, I love listening to it, but I'm just capable of it. So if I wanted to become a singer, a jazz singer or something like that, it would be ridiculous. No matter how much I do love jazz music, but that that's something I have to learn about myself, what I'm capable of doing. And I couldn't be a I couldn't be a basketball player. I'm not barely. I was 6 feet tall at my height and at the highest, and now I'm 5'10" or something, or 5'11". So you get to know what you're able to do to contribute. So what do you enjoy doing? What are you capable of doing well, so that you can make a contribution? And and thirdly, what does the world need? What is there in the world that can be improved or added to? And again, there are a whole bunch of things that are particularly pressing that you believe in. And what is it that you believe in that, and the world has a lot of needs, so it's not hard to find them, but you have to have some sense that what you're doing is relevant in some way. And then finally, the last point is that young people who are on the road to purpose, on the path to purpose, will find somebody in their lives or somebody in the public who is a role model, somebody that is a living instantiation of the purpose that they want to develop. And that's very helpful too. What does it look like in flesh and blood? It could be a parent, it could be a teacher, it could be a boss like that McDonald's manager, or it could be somebody in the public. But there should be some actual sense of, it's not just abstract. This is what it looks like in real life. So those are the 4 points that we found in common among all the young people that developed purpose. They had the interest, they had the capacity in that area to actually do something. They had some sense that this is what the world needs, or this is what can improve the world. And they had some role model or somebody they could look to that could give them a living sense of what it looks like to have this kind of purpose.
That person, I think, is so important. It's like a template. You know, the great one of the case studies I talk about is Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had this guy Reg Park, who was a Mr. Universe who went on to be an actor in Hollywood. And like blueprint, anybody that follows the blueprint then for Reg Park.
Nice.
So that really resonated with me when you mentioned that. So the young people, Bill, that you had in your survey expressed dedication to purposeful categories, as you call them, and there was a descending order. And I thought we'd share this because for people to know that it's not just about work or sport. There's other places that you can find purpose. And I thought we'd share that, and then we'd share the categorization of people that you talked to, because you categorized what type of different these youth that you had studied. But when I looked at that, I said that categorization of people, like for example, dreamers or dabblers, that remains with people throughout their lives. And it also remains with organizations. I found as well that actually organizations in an innovation sense can be dabblers or dreamers. And I'll explain all that in a moment. But first, let's share these categories, these purposeful categories, as you call them.
The reason it's important to emphasize that there are lots of places that people can find purpose is that often, at least in our society, people think of work as being the primary one. And of course, work is a vocation. The old root of the word vocation is calling. And so, of course, work is a very primary place for a lot of people to find purpose, but it's far from the only one. And actually, family, in our international studies all over the world, I think family came out the most common. People find purpose in dedicating themselves to their families, whether it's the younger generation raising children or taking care of their parents and grandparents or their siblings, or even creating a non-kinship family. So there are lots of types of families, but dedicating yourself to the welfare of your family is certainly an important, very common sense of purpose around the world. And then there's faith. In in our studies, and I think in the United States generally, other surveys also have found about 15% of the population being devoutly faithful, that faith would be the number one purpose, religious faith for that segment. And even for the ones that are not devoutly faithful, it still could be a purpose for people who have purposes in other directions. These are not mutually exclusive. You can have you can have your primary source of purpose, your work, and your faith can be an additional source of purpose. So we're not consigned to just having one purpose in life. And then other categories that were a bit less common, but still had substantial portions of the population included art, sports, entertainment, providing entertainment for people, and civics. That dedicating yourself to the community in some way, the welfare of the community could either be in an organized way. I want to be a member of city council or the school board, or a way that's less formal. I want to get a group of people together to clean up our neighborhood park or something like that. So all of those are sources of purpose: family, work, faith, art, music, sports, civic purpose, and so on. And as I said, people can have multiple purposes. Some people have a single-minded main purpose. Others have several purposes. They work, and they also want to support their family with their income from their work, and that's a, a dual purpose. And they may also be people of faith. So you can have more than one purpose.
There's so much more I wanted to share, and I'll just throw in something here that we won't go into, but just to give you a flavor. So, one of the things Bill talks about is scouting for purpose with, for example, your children, spotting when or where they show an expressed interest that they're leaning in a bit more than usual. And I thought about that, Bill, exact same for a leader in an organization. Sometimes you'll have somebody who's a square peg in a round hole and they're not succeeding, and they'll feel that inside. And if you can move them into where they truly belong, or they maybe have joined your company not because they want to, but because they think this is what their parents want of them. All these kind of things play out not so positively in the future if you don't deal with them early. But I thought the last
Oh,
thing,
right.
which, sorry, Bill, do you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to confirm what you said, that in our study of family purpose, we were surprised at how many complications and missteps that even very well off families had been making, especially in communication with cross generations. And it's exactly as you said, the the whole ball game is finding the right the right place for people, and recognizing this individual's talents and interests, and let's make that work, rather than have this be a source of conflict. So in family business, this is a big deal.
I used to think about it as a parent watching my kids and almost like a honeybee, and notice which flowers they land on and kind of go, he spent a bit extra time on that one. Let's give it some energy. But one of the things, just a warning, and Bill, it's not just pointing out all the challenges here. Bill gives a whole solution, an FAQ, as you call it, Bill, in the book, the most frequently asked questions that you're asked by parents, and answers those questions as well in the book. So, one of the watchouts I took from it is that sometimes a kid will say something to you, and you're kind of going, "Oh, that's a good idea. Why don't you make that into a business for yourself?" And you're going, "That's not the way either." Like, because then you're making it into self-serving, and you're
Yeah.
you're seeing things through your own lenses and your own life as well. All that's in the book. That I thought a very important thing to share was something I teed up a moment ago, and these were the four groups that you broke people into this national sample, which you called the disengaged, and non-purposeful, the dreamers, the dabblers, and the purposeful. And as Bill describes this to us, think about people in organizations as well, because they exist in every facet of life. Think of organizations themselves, as Bill tells us about these categories.
Well, you mentioned the disengaged, or the quote drifters, as we call them. And it's important to start with them because they are people that are not even looking for goals or purpose. And it's a substantial part of the population. It's as many as 20 to 25%. And often they're alienated, they've given up, or they may be very hedonistic. These are also the young people kind of drinking their way through college, and they're not looking to go to classes or learning anything. So the profiles can look somewhat different. Some of them are anxious, depressed, have given up. Others think they're quite happy and hedonistic, and why bother looking for goals anyway? But for whatever reason, they're very difficult for educators to work with, to promote purpose among, because they're not looking for it. They don't see any reason for it, or they've given up on it. And as I said, it's a disturbingly large minority of the population, as many as 25% in any group we've looked at. The other groups, of course, one of the groups are the fully purposeful. And in youth, meaning up to about the early to mid 20s, we only find about 1 in 5 of young people have really figured it out and are fully purposeful. And that's why I always say to parents, don't get impatient, because it's not even a norm to be fully purposeful by your early 20s. If your child is, that's great, but have patience. And also to young people sometimes, gee, I haven't found my purpose yet. Well, don't worry about it, as long as you're moving towards it. Which brings up the other two categories that you mentioned. And these are categories of young people that have actually made some progress towards finding purpose, but they haven't gotten all the way there. And one people that we colloquially, we give them these snarky nicknames, and I hope they're not offensive to people, but they're ways of summing it up in colloquial. One we call the dreamers, which means people that actually have purposeful beliefs, and they have the intention, and they can be quite noble beliefs. They can really believe in, gee, I want to do something in my life to help the environment, to help clean up the environment, or mitigate climate change, or something like that. Or maybe artists. I want to create beautiful artworks, or become a filmmaker. And they have all kinds of ideas about it, but they actually have not done anything in an active sense, that shows any commitment to it. So it's all in the head. They're talking the talk, but not walking the walk. And a lot of them will then find activities that will help them fill in the activity component, and then they will become fully purposeful. But that has not happened yet. And it may not happen for years, or even a decade or two. So I always want to emphasize that you have to be patient. But those are the dreamers. And then people that we've called the dabblers. And again, I don't mean anything snarky by it, really, because these are good kids who have their days full of activities. And they're doing what teachers and parents have advised them to do. Maybe they're taking piano lessons. Maybe they're doing some sports. Maybe they're doing lots of homework. So they're good kids, and they're doing a lot of stuff, but they have not owned any of the activities that they've done. They don't really believe in any of it. So there's a perfunctory nature to what they do. And they do it because they're supposed to do it. Or maybe they're doing it because they want to build a good record to be admitted to a university. And that's not really a purpose in and of itself, unless you understand why your university education is important to help you accomplish something that is purposeful. But just to get into a high status university is not in itself what we consider to be a purpose, because it's, again, all about you, and it's not It's not anything trying to accomplish anything meaningful. So people we call the dabblers, young people, they have often a full plate of activities, but what they are missing is the vision, the dream, the belief. And so these other two categories, the dreamers and the dabblers, hopefully a lot of them will fill in what's missing in their lives. The dreamers, the activity, the dabblers, the vision. Not all of them will, but a lot of them will. And that's why a lot of the move towards purpose in the population takes place in the late 20s or all the way up into the 30s and sometimes later than that for a lot of individuals.
Fantastic, Bill. Absolutely fantastic. I've gone way over our time that we allotted, and I'm very, very grateful to you for that. I pulled a little quote that I wanted to just tell people about, share for the end of the show as my sign off. But for people who want to reach out to you, Bill, where's the best place that they can find you?
Well, probably the best way to reach me is through Stanford. And if you look on the Stanford website and you type my name in, you'll get an email address that you can send an email that I will see. It actually goes through my assistant, Lisa Staten, but she's very good at promptly showing them to me and that kind of thing. So Stanford University, look on the website, search my name, and there is an email address there that I do. It gives me a lot of gratification. I love hearing from people who have benefited in any way possible from anything I've said or written or done. So I certainly enjoy it, and I certainly welcome communications from people. I'm not able to give advice to people or something like that on any kind of a individual level because I don't presume to have the answers to life. But I love to hear from people, and if people enjoy my reading what I have to say, that's just great. It gives me a lot of gratification and fulfillment in what my purpose in life has been, which is to try to find out things about the world and share them with people that are useful.
Well, it gives me great pleasure and purpose to amplify your message as well, Bill. And I just wanted to share this last quote. You write in the book that the research is clear. While absorption in purposeful tasks may be strenuous, it also brings a deep sense of satisfaction, well being, and exhilaration. The paradox is that the exertion of hard and often thankless effort in service of a purpose, with little thought of personal gain, is a surer path to happiness than the eager pursuit of happiness for its own sake. Absolutely beautiful. I thought a beautiful way to sign off. Author of The Path to Purpose, William Bill Damon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you, Aidan.